Welcome, everybody. Let's open with a word of prayer. Holy God, we thank you for your continued goodness and watch care over us. Please guide us and bless us as we try to understand ourselves better and to understand you better. As we delve into the purpose of our creation, may you give us a glimpse of humanity and divinity. In Jesus' name, amen. So I had quite a few questions, and I don't know that I can answer all of them. So I apologize for that. But I'll go through each question, and if I can't answer them all, I'll just say I don't know the answer. Feel free to ask additional questions. And I'll probably ask you questions as well. So, question number 1. Why was Adam created first? What does it mean? And many people don't know how to respond to that question. So who's got any thoughts? Why was Adam created first? You must have thought about it before. Sorry? I can't hear you. You want me to pick them to answer? I will in a second. What are our options? Adam first? Another option? Eve first? Third option? Together.
They are created together.
At the same time.
At the same time.
So I guess the person who's asking the question, why was Adam created first? If it was the other way round, they would ask that same question. So if Eve was created first, would we ask the same question? Yeah? We should, but would we? Because I've got a feeling most people wouldn't.
We would ask a different question.
What question would you ask?
Why was he created as second?
That's the same question. Okay, so when people ask this question, they tend to ask it in the framework of patriarchy. So if we can move away from that, because I don't think it's a patriarchal issue. It's more about why they were created in a sequence. And then the second question we would want to ask is, there's the order. The second one is
Time that they were created in the same time.
we know that they weren't. So I'm going to put that question aside for a moment. If we tackle the actual creation itself, they're created in order or sequence. And the other question we would ask is,
That Eve was created from his rib.
so the creation is different. Adam is created from dirt or soil, and Eve is created from a part of Adam. So because we live thousands of years later in a corrupt world where men rule, we tend to have this idea that it's not fair. But let's try to put that aside and try to wonder why God created it in this way. So if you were God, what would you have done? Try to answer that question. What would you have done? So you'd create them at once, and would you create them the same way or differently? Okay, so you'd create them the same way. Peter, you were saying?
I would create them the same way.
Okay, Thomas?
Create them from the same material, same way.
Same way, same time?
Yes.
Okay.
I wouldn't do it that way because it would be a double work and I would do the same work twice.
So you wouldn't do it which way? Just tell me how you would do it.
A ako by si to urobil?
So
Be the same way like God? Maybe not, I don't know.
okay, so you're not sure.
Yes.
Anyone else?
So someone who makes um, mm, Tomáš, sochy, sculpture.
Yeah.
Yeah, they make it from the same material, but it has different shapes.
Okay, so they might look different, but you'd do it at the same time, same material. Anyone else? So are we then questioning God? God did it wrong? We're saying we don't agree. Well, you don't agree because you said if I was God, I would have done it differently. So doesn't that kind of indicate you see some fault with God's plan? If you would do it differently.
Maybe it indicates we just don't understand the plan.
Okay, so we don't understand the plan. So if we don't understand the plan, our option would be to do a different plan, as opposed to trying to understand the plan. So when we get to this stage, people get nervous and they say, I don't want to be against God. So let's try to understand why God would do it that way. Is there a difference between creating the woman first or the man first? Why would God do that? Any thoughts? Okay? So that's what, is there a difference between a man and a woman? So there's no difference. So if you get to the place where there's no difference between a man and a woman, so let's begin with that. Does everybody agree there's no difference?
Do we not look at biological differences? Do we not take those?
So if we're going to look at biological differences, then what would that teach us?
That they're different.
So they have slightly different roles or functions, but you already know that about the Godhead. And yet, the very essence of God, I think we all understand that they're the same. So we agree that each personality of the Godhead are all essentially the same in their essence. They behave differently. They have different roles. They look different. So if we take those differences as being superficial and we take the essence of divinity, do we all agree that they're the same? Yes? So if we take that and when we come to human beings, we see that they're the same. So if we can get to that place, then if we're going to create them in sequence, it wouldn't matter which way we do it, would it? Okay, so if there's no difference, then you just flip a coin and you say Adam first or Eve first. We were going to do it that way. If you have questions or you disagree, please say. So if you're going to start the first person, what would you create them from? Because you can just click your fingers and create them. There's many, many ways you could do it. Rather than me asking which way you would do it, let's try to think about why God created the first person out of dust. What's the reason for that? I'm not going to use the word parable because everything's a parable. We'll try and say something specific. Why would God create the first person from dust? Ellie? But God could have just spoken Adam into existence and it would have been the same as God. Why dust? Why soil? So it's the reason it's dust is because it's muted us. We already have dust. But we already have air and the sea. So why the dust? You're not sure? Okay. Tamina? Just
Um, because we know when a person dies, they turn back to dust. You have beginning and end. So the dust is actually the beginning, and you come back to at the end, you turn to dust again.
okay. There's a Bible verse that if anybody knows, it says ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Maybe it's a Bible verse, maybe it's
Death was not supposed to be there, so I don't think that's a good reason.
okay. So there's never supposed to be any death, so it doesn't agree with Tamina. Do you have a problem with that, Tamina? Do you understand at least the logic? Okay. You have a response? Okay. So you defeated Tamina. You don't translate that? Or they already know it? I don't know.
So
Okay.
Že jestliže, což teda víme až teď,
um,
když teda z té hlíny, tak to může souviset s tím, že my máme představovat těm andělům přesně to, co se děje tady na zemi, proto z té hlíny.
I'm thinking that it's dirt because the dirt is from the earth, and it's at this earth where we were supposed to show to the angels. A čo im máme predstavovať?
Obraz Boha. So we should
Represent to the angels the picture of God on this earth, and we are from this earth.
Okay. I think we've got at least some teachers or scientists amongst us. So let's try use a bit of science. So I'm not asking it, expecting a response. It's a rhetorical question. Is God restricted in what they can do? Are there limitations, either self-imposed or law demands limitations? So I think the answer to that, at least for me, is yes. God both lives in a spiritual realm, but also in a physical one. And in the physical realm, there are laws. And we all know in our own existence, you can go as far back as you want to, besides the very few miracles that are recorded, the way the earth, the solar system, the universe operates is quite mechanistic. And human beings have figured out quite a lot of how things work. So God's going to create human beings. And once they're created, and then God's going to say, you do some creation. How do human beings create? They don't make statues out of dirt. And they don't do surgery and take body parts out. So they don't use the two mechanisms that God used, but they do create. And I think we could agree that, hopefully we agree that their creation is equally valid as God's creation was. You agree with that? So if we start on from that premise, then let me get some input from you. If that's enough clue.
Use the material that they themselves are created from.
Who's they? Who's the they?
A kdo sú tí oni?
You said,
People use the same material that they are created from.
okay, yes.
From what they're doing.
I think this is
Sorry. I forgot. So from the creation.
He said that they learn.
People learn, yeah. About
Okay, so
themselves.
regardless of the learning, the point you made was when they create from what? Human beings create from what?
They create from the same material they are created from.
They create from the same material. So if you were to take, we'll say the three elements of this planet, water, air, and dirt. What one are we most closely related to? Dirt.
Zem.
Most of the elements that you need to create human beings, if not all of them, are in the dirt. How do we, once we're created, how do we continue living? What's the mechanism for continual life? This is science, not religion.
We grow the food and we grow the food and we get it from the earth.
Yes, we grow food. Yes, we have to breathe and drink. That's why I said most of the elements.
Yeah.
But we don't actually have to drink, because if you just ate fruit, vegetables, you can get all the water that you want from them. But we do have to breathe. We do have to breathe. But what you have in the atmosphere is already in the soil anyway. We just take it out, not from the soil, but from the air. So all I'm suggesting is when God creates, God's going to have to create from something. And to keep us alive, we will have to eat food. And besides photosynthesis, that all comes from the soil. So there's a cycle, if you like. And that's why I'm suggesting that the first person is created from dust. Because we're of the same nature as dust. Which was very similar to what Radke said and what Peter had said. Radke gave a spiritual answer, but a scientific answer is that we're made of the same material. So whilst it's a supernatural creation, it's still very mechanistic. So if we've answered that question, that leads to a surface satisfaction. Let's move to the second one. Why create the second person differently? Because God could create that person in the same way from soil. But Peter said, when we create children from the same elements that we are. So we all have a basic understanding of cell biology and procreation. Having babies. So the second person is going to be created from a part of the first person, which is basically how we produce children. I understand the biology is very different, but the concept is the same. So what is God trying to show us there? Let's not do a spiritual thing. You know, like it's the rib that covers the heart, the fifth rib, all of those things. That she's not the head and not the toe. We understand all of those. So we understand those geographical elements. But why create from the first person? Anybody? Amina?
Because that's how we will create. We will not create from dust. We will create then from the result God made. He put air, dust, and water together, and we take that and we create from that.
I'll repeat it. So the first person's created from dust. The second person's created from another person. I asked why. And Tamina said it served as an example of how we would create. Because the only way we can create is by, I'll say it this way, by giving a part of ourselves. So I think we can all agree with that principle. And we'll say that that is I'm going to call it the plan for human. Procreation or having babies. Yep. So it's creation, it's just procreation means you positively do it. So it's the plan of how we will create from ourselves. Why is that important? Why is it important that we create from ourselves? If you're not sure, go back in your mind and try to remember what Adam said. What does Adam say once the second person's created?
This is the bone of my own bone and body of my body.
So this is bone of my bone, body of my body. Anything else?
The name she got was from him.
Okay. So we'll put the name aside. Let's go with what's he trying to say in a very simple term?
They're of the same material.
They're of the same material.
This element of giving of oneself.
So there's an element of giving of yourself. There's this element of oneness. Because they're created from the same material. Anything else? Okay. We'll accept that. Why is that important? Peter, why is it important to create from yourself? or reproduce from yourself?
Adam or
Humans. Why is it
Show
important
this
for all of us? Daniska said it's important for Adam because it's important for all of us. We all share those common emotions. She didn't quite say all of that. She didn't exactly say that. But I'm adding to what she said. And I'm asking, why is it important to do that?
you have a feeling of being one with someone?
So we have a feeling of being one.
Or he was alone, but after he had a companion.
Companion could have been created anyway. We've already established that. But we want to know why it was that way.
Learn from it how God works.
So we learn how God works. Peter, I like that.
Can see the picture of himself because she is of him, and when she sees her, he understands himself better.
I'm going to put reflection. Is that same principle that you said? When you look at your child, you see yourself. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to stop there on that question and let's summarize. Question was, why was Adam created first? What does it mean? So I want to suggest that the way the question is being asked, its framework with a negative connotation to it, I think it seems negative, is because of, we'll call it the sinful world in which we live. If we lived in a different world, say sinless one, I don't think we would have asked this question in this framework. When people ask the question and we say, I don't know the answer to that, what they're really asking is, why are men always first? Why are women always second-rate citizens? And you see that replicated at creation. So I think it has a negative connotation to it. So my suggestion is we try to take out that negativity. And we don't look at what happened afterwards or the sin problem. And then we try to understand three questions. Why do it in sequence? Why create the first one from dust? And why create the second one from the body of the first person? They're the three questions. So we've answered number 2. God creates from dust because all the elements that we're comprised of, we find in dust. And then to sustain our bodies, Testing. So we've at least answered that point superficially. Third one, third part of the question. Why create the second person from the first? It was to show us and to reinforce this idea of companionship, relationships. And oneness. So hopefully we've answered those two.
To me, it seems like the first shows that we need work, because we were saying that when we create from dust again. So we need work. And the second shows that we need relationships. So we need both to be happy.
Okay. Oh, yes, sorry. Okay, if there's no more thoughts, I'll just try to briefly tackle the first question. The first answer. What was that? I broke it down into 3 parts. So what was part 1? Why is it done sequentially?
Prečo je to robené
Why not together? So, does anybody have any thoughts now?
time on the earth? I don't know how it is in heaven, if there is time. On this world, there's always a sequence in things. If we go even to the micro world, nothing happens like at the same time. There's a sequence of events happening.
Okay. Anyone else? Peter?
Was able to experience what it means to be alone, and that taught him something.
What else? Want to say something? Why sequence? It's to... Let's try to just come up with a simple answer. So we've got the answer from Peter that he could understand loneliness and the desire for companionship. So 2 people had that. Why are there 3 gods? Very sensitive subject, of course. Why not 1?
More heads, more brains.
More heads, more brains.
We know relationships if there was just one.
Okay, relationships. Were you going to say something more?
Alone. It says cooperation.
So we can stop there. I think we've answered this question of why there's a sequence. Because if they were created at the same time, in the same way, they would essentially be independent of one another. And this idea of creating the second person from the first reinforces or brings this bond of union. So if we think about equality, we say it should be at the same time in the same way. Maybe we're looking at equality in the wrong way. Okay, if there's no questions, I'll move on. Next one. We are learning about equality and have hierarchy in the movement. Let me rephrase that question. We're learning about equality, and yet we have hierarchy in the movement. So there seems to be a conflict between equality and hierarchy. What will it be like in heaven? What does it mean we rule with God? We inferred in the past that we were called to be equal with God. What does that mean? Going back to hierarchy in the movement, and in heaven, and you put that with equality, how do we get all of these things to come together? So let's try to break the questions down simply. We all learned about equality. So you've all got some idea in your mind of what equality means, what it looks like, what it feels like. Then we have what the questioner called hierarchy. So that's what we currently have in the movement. What's it going to be like in heaven? We're supposed to be ruling with God. Does that mean we're equal with God? And how do we put all of these elements together? What are your thoughts?
With God, because we are creation and He's creator.
So we can't be equal with God because God's divinity and we're humanity, creator, created. Is that what you said? So can you ever be equal with your children? You're the creator. They're the created.
Level, yes.
No, fine, thank you. On some level. So on some level, can we be equal to God? Did you say yes or no? Did I force you to say yes, or that you could see the logic?
Cool. But God will always supersede us. Like He will always be bigger than us. They will always be bigger.
Are you always bigger than your children?
This way.
I don't mean physically. I mean the same way you used bigger.
Some of the things children are better.
As your children go older, so say you have a family of 4. Family of 3, we'll make it simple. No, we'll go with 4. 2 children, 2 parents. When it starts off, what does it look like? We'll talk about the power sharing. I don't mean in a wicked world, in your perfect world. What does it look like?
I have the power over them.
There's four of you. You said I is one.
I have the power over the children.
So let's go with parents first. Let's look at that power relationship. How does that look? We're talking about power structures in a family of four. At the beginning, you said that parents are over their children. I say, let's go with the parents first. Parent to parent. Equal
They are equal.
from the very beginning. Yep. Are they different? They're not. You look different.
Physically different.
At least physically, well, we could show that there's more than physical differences. Different. So you've got a family, you've got parents, they're equal and they're different. Going back to this question, what's the main role of the parents at the beginning?
We're parents, so they have children already.
We'll go, no, I know I'm using the word parents. What will they do first?
They take care of the garden, I say, in your house.
No, not take care of the garden. They create. Yep. So they're going to create. Who does that look like? Anybody? Who? Adam, who does that look like to you? Who's equal, different, and creates? Don't know? God. Good. Does that work for you, Adam? God. Okay. So then what does God do? God's going to create, and you have a child. One child. And then you have another child. And what's the power structure there between the children?
The older one is stronger.
Stronger? No, not stronger. What then? Are they equal? I'm not asking you what you want them to be. I'm asking you what they are in real life. This one is 6 years old, and this one's 6 months old. They're not equal. Okay, so there's a power struggle between them. At the beginning, the power struggle isn't visible. Perhaps. But as they grow, that power struggle increases as they get from babyhood to childhood to adolescence, teenage. So there's a power struggle there. They're not equal. And they are, what do we put here? Compare and contrast.
God and person.
Equal, not equal. Create, created. Yeah, they're created. Okay. Are they different? For sure, they're different. Okay, I put question mark because I said for sure, and you said yes. So I don't want this to sound patriarchal. One parent goes to work and one parent stays at home. One cooks, one doesn't cook. They're different. The children, are they different? Well, I'm not asking about their personalities. We're talking about the power structure of the family. They're not different. Are we okay with that? This is where we get into problems because that's a boy and that's a girl. Then if I say, are they different? They end up being different because we bring them up incorrectly. That's one. And then we go to what our friend said. There's one's not better than the other. But we all know if there's an age difference, even if they're twins, what happens between children, between siblings? They're rivals. They fight,
Bojujú medzi.
whether it's Cain and Abel or one of the other twins that I can't remember their names in the Bible. Jacob and Esau, yes. So you see that there's a struggle between them. So are they different? No, they're not different. But they think they are. Who are these? Sorry? This is the people. We the people. So if you think about that, about the power dynamics there, you'll see that this mirrors all of your experiences. I think it's Paul says, when I was a child, I used to think like a child. When I grew up, I started behaving like an adult. Okay, so if there's no questions on that, then let's move forward. We'll go with the human because the earthly does what? When we think about parable teaching.
Heavenly.
The human explains the divine. The earthly explains the heavenly. So if you want to know how heaven works, you just need to understand how power structures work on Earth. So now you can begin to hopefully understand. We'll go with the children first. As they grow older, what should happen? What's the difference between a 10-year-old child and 10-day-year-old child? Is there a big difference? A huge difference. Those 10 years make the world of difference. Now you have 65 and 75-year-old. Now what's the difference? None. There's no difference now. So that can show us on a very simplistic level that as these children, as humans, mature, and you could have different stories. You could do Eden to Eden. You could go from mortality to immortality. You could do at the beginning of heaven and go through the millennium. Whatever story you want to talk about maturity, what do we know? You start off as not equal. You start off unequal. And then as you mature, you begin to see that that inequality disappears. By the time you get to the end, you end up being the same. And on this planet, as Tamina said, you all end up where? In the dust. You all become equal at the end. Okay, so that's a story of human beings. You can all see that children, they all end up at the very end being equal. The parents were always equal. So there's no change there. So now let's look at what? We looked at these two on their own, these two on their own, and now we're going to look at together. Because that's what the question was. What does it mean that we will rule with God? So don't think about your family. Do not think about your family. Do not think about the families that you know of. But think about a good family or the ideal family, how you would imagine it should operate. How should these four people interact with one another? We'll say at the end, which means at maturity. We already know that these are supposed to be the same and these are the same. What should your relationship with your children look like? We'll say when they turn 40 and you're 70, say. What should your relationship be then? You said equal? I would suggest, like I think you're beginning to see, that they should be equal. If we agree that they should be equal, and I think you'd probably all agree, even if not in your family, in the families that you know that they're not equal, who's the one that's at fault? When you look around or in your experience, every single one of you are all children of somebody. So some of you are minors, but all the adults here, you've all experienced this power struggle with your parents. And when you came to adulthood, I think you're all nearly 40, if not over. and your parents were old or aged, what would you have expected? What would you have thought would be the right thing? Would you think it would be right to wait till your parents can't clean their own bottom? They can't get out of bed and they need you. Do you think it should get to that stage before you are equal? That their minds don't work well, and now you have to take control of their money. Do you think you have to wait that long before you can share power with them? Ask yourself how you feel or felt when your parents still treated you like a child. I don't mean when you were 18. I mean when you were, 30, 40, a real adult. So you don't have to give a testimony. You don't have to give a testimony unless you want to. But it explains this scenario I'm suggesting. I want to suggest most parents don't give up their power when you get to the end, when everyone's an adult. They still want to control their children. They're more powerful than their children. They don't trust their children. Whatever dynamic you want to think of, they want to hold on to power. And you know that most of the time, they're not actually capable of holding on to that power and exercising it. But they still do. So for me, when we talk about what does it mean to be equal with God or ruling with God, it's about this power sharing. We know that the parents are different. We know that children have different personalities, but they're not different. But when you get to the end, now you don't have two parents and two children. What do you have? Yes, exactly that. You have 4 adults. Each one is slightly different. Some have strengths and some have weaknesses. And without being blasphemous, I think that's what it means about ruling with God. Without being blasphemous, which means saying something bad about God. When it talks about ruling, I think we get to a place where 4 adults, 2 gods and 2 humans, come together and they share power together. And it's not about us taking God's job or being as clever as God. It's about God realizing that it's now time to share their power and their authority. Not like human parents because they're too old and frail, but a recognition that their created beings have now come of age, and the relationship that they can have now is stronger, better, more healthy than the one that they had before, when there was power over them. And as I said, I don't want to get blasphemous about God's weaknesses. I didn't find the Ellen White quote, but she says one of the greatest mistakes that parents make when they get elderly is to release authority and power to their children. To hand over the keys. They still want to hold on to that. How do they do it? They make a mistake because they don't want to hand over their power to their children. I said it in the form of a key. They have the keys and they don't want to give the keys to the children. And God's willing to do that. God's willing to power share with us. Because it's good for whom? For all of them. And I think that's where we struggle. We think God doesn't need us, that we're the ones that need God, that God's doing us some favor. It's all just an act. But I think the more we learn and know about God, the more we realize that God needs us in many ways that we don't really fully appreciate. In the same way that a parent needs their children to support and take care of them. All of us have many friends. But you have the term blood is thicker than water. You have that term? There's a special bond between the couple and the parents to the children. And children to children. So, all I'm suggesting, God has millions of created beings, surrounded by beings that are more majestic and beautiful than maybe we would ever be. I don't know. And yet, like you, the apple of God's eye, that's a Bible verse, I don't know if you are us. These children who are rude, disrespectful, rebellious. But we will get to a place where we become adults. And most of the time, when we get to the end, you realize the people that were bad were not the naughty children. It was the dysfunctional parents. And our job function is to understand ourselves, but it's also to understand our parent, God, because when we question God, often we see God being dysfunctional. And our problem is we're too afraid to say that. If I was going to create, most of you said I would have done it in a completely different way. And so our work is to deconstruct God's behavior like it is exactly with our parents. And when we see our parents' dysfunctionality, I think our goal is to realize the lack of dysfunctionality when we view God. Or we see God's perfection, basically. And it's not that easy to see. So that's what my answer for that question is. And yeah, so I'm going to say I'll stop there and I'll just field some questions now.
You said it is hard to see God as not dysfunctional. Is it because of our own dysfunctional experiences within the family? Is that why we see God in that way? Čiže moja nebol nefunkčný, že ho vidíme vlastne pokazané. Ja to pýtam, či je to preto, lebo vlastne sami akože máme skúsenosti pokazaných nefunkčných stavov našich rodinách.
In English, there's a saying or a phrase. A little knowledge is dangerous. You have something like that? Okay. So at least we can all understand the concept, even if you don't agree. When we get amateurs like us who learn something, they often think that they know more than they really know. So I'm going to use that. I think it's a principle about this question. So I asked, if you were going to create, how would you do it? Most of you said I wouldn't do it this way. This way's silly. Doesn't make any sense. It's not even righteous. And you're basing all of that on your understanding of stuff, whatever the thing is. And I'm saying the reason you view it that way is because you think you're an expert now, because you've read a book or heard a sermon on equality. So now we're all the resident experts on equality. We look at God and we see God is failing on the test of equality. And that's why we see dysfunctionality. And so our job is to learn more about equality, not to keep silent or to be quiet. And I think the more we learn about equality, we see that God's actions and our views of God and their actions will end up getting to a place where they join together and they're in unity. So we did a little exercise this morning. We looked at how God creates, and hopefully we saw some sense behind it. Then we looked at another subject related but different. We didn't look at all the issues about equality. We ended up focusing on one part, which is how about ruling with God? It doesn't make any sense. And then how can we be equal to God? So we gave a little example here to at least begin to open up a thought process that this plan that we have, the plan that we've been given by God, because we didn't make this up. These are all inspired statements. And I think people say, maybe we don't understand what they mean because we think we have an idea of what equality means. So hopefully in these two really good questions and the simple answers that we've come to or conclusions, that we can see that what appears to be dysfunctionality or crazy behavior, like how can we rule with God? God's too big and we're too small. We begin to get into the mind of God. So that's how I would answer that question. What appears dysfunctional is based upon our misunderstanding, because we've got a little bit of knowledge, and the Solomon would say not much wisdom. And the more wisdom we can get, hopefully using rules, things that didn't make sense, if they don't make sense now, at least they seem more reasonable. Even though we haven't fully defined how can we rule with God, you can see the reasonableness of it. Because we all have experienced the bad behavior of our parents. How we have wanted to get close to them in adulthood, and they still treat us like we're 10. And how hurtful and damaging that is. And so if we can understand that, the failure of our parents, and the success of God's plan, I think we can answer that question about dysfunctionality. And it helps us to understand better what equality looks like and how hierarchy works. Let's close with prayer. Holy God, we thank you that you have better about my weakness and your strength, my foolishness and your wisdom. And yet, as I understand you better and myself better, I begin to see a way forward, that you have a plan to let me come closer to you. I look forward to that time. I look forward to the experience that I'm having now and understanding you better and getting closer to you. I pray this experience for each of us. In Jesus' name. Amen.